Good evening and welcome back, History Mythology. I am your guide tonight through the oldest of all stories, the tale of how everything came to be. Tonight we journey into the beginning itself, to a place before places existed, to a time before time learned to flow. As always, let me know where in the world you're listening from. Get comfortable, wrap yourself in warmth, and settle in. The night is long, and we have far to travel. There is a question that has haunted every thinking creature since the first moment consciousness flickered into being. What was, before anything was? Not the world as you know it, not the earth beneath your feet, solid and real, not the sky above, stretching endlessly with its stars and its storms, not even time itself, that river that carries us all toward some distant shore. But something before all of these things, something that had no name because names require language, and language requires minds to speak it, and minds had not yet come into being. Imagine, if you can, a darkness that is not darkness, not the absence of light, which would still be something, a thing that could be named, measured, understood, but a darkness that contains no light and no absence of light, a void that is not empty, because emptiness is still a state of being. Rather, it is a nothingness so complete, so total, that the very concept of existence has not yet learned to whisper itself into being. There is no sound in this place, not silence, mind you. Silence is the absence of sound, and absence is still something. There is no sound because sound has never existed. There are no ears to hear, no air to carry vibrations, no throats to cry out. There is only the vast breathing emptiness that stretches infinitely in all directions and in no directions at all, because direction itself has not yet been born. In this void, there is no motion, yet it is not still, because stillness implies a state of rest, and rest requires something to be resting. It is not cold, nor hot, nor warm. It is not wet nor dry. It is not hard nor soft. It is not any of these things, because the very concepts that would allow us to describe it have not yet come into being. The void exists in a state beyond all description, beyond all understanding, beyond even the possibility of being understood. And yet, and this is the mystery that lies at the heart of all creation, in this void that cannot be perceived, in this nothingness that cannot be named, something begins to stir. Not a movement exactly, not a change, because change requires time, and time has not yet begun its eternal flow, but rather a kind of awareness, a sense that something is becoming, a whisper of potential in the infinite dark. It is as if the void itself in its infinite solitude begins to dream, and in that dream the first thought forms, not a thought with words or images, but the very essence of thought itself, the possibility of knowing, the potential for being, the first tremor of consciousness in an ocean of unconsciousness. In this darkness that was not darkness, in this silence that had never known sound, something began to dream. And in that dream, all things would eventually be born. The dream deepens. What began as a whisper becomes a pulse. What was potential begins to lean toward actuality, though it has not yet crossed that threshold into being. In the vast expanse of the void, something is learning to wake. This is not a sudden awakening as you might imagine it. There is no moment where the void opens its eyes and sees the light. Rather, it is a gradual emergence, like the slow turning of seasons that have not yet been named, like the patient unfurling of a flower that blooms in a garden that does not yet exist. The void is becoming aware of itself, and in that awareness, the first boundaries begin to form. Where there was once only infinite potential, there now emerges the faintest suggestion of distinction. Not yet separation, that would come later, but the first hint that one thing might be different from another thing. The void begins to sense its own edges, though it has no edges. It begins to know its own vastness, though vastness requires something to measure against. It begins to feel the weight of its own existence, though existence itself is still being born. And in this moment of awakening, something extraordinary happens. The void does not remain void. It does not collapse into nothing or explode into everything. Instead, it begins to name itself. Not with words have not yet been invented, but with the deep, resonant tones of pure being. The void speaks its own name into existence, and that name is chaos. But do not mistake this chaos for the disorder and destruction that the word conjures in modern minds. This is not chaos as destruction. This is not the random violence of a world without order. This chaos is something far more profound and far more beautiful. It is the principle of infinite potential. It is the womb from which all things will eventually spring. It is the raw, undifferentiated possibility that contains within it every form that could ever exist, every thought that could ever be thought, every moment that could ever unfold. Chaos is not evil. Chaos is not good. Chaos simply is, the fundamental ground of being from which all other things will emerge. It is vast beyond measure, deep beyond fathoming, and ancient beyond time itself. And as chaos becomes aware of itself, as it begins to understand its own nature, something else begins to happen. The boundaries that were forming within the void begin to solidify. The distinctions that were merely suggested begin to take on weight and substance, and from within the infinite potential of chaos, something begins to separate itself. Something begins to say, I am different, I am myself, I am becoming. This is the first true act of creation, not the creation of something from nothing, for chaos is not nothing, it is everything, and nothing at once. But the creation of distinction, the creation of self-awareness, the creation of the possibility that one thing might be separate from another thing, and that from this separation all the infinite complexity of the universe might eventually flow. In the womb of chaos, something stirs. In the vast darkness, something dreams of form. In the infinite potential, something begins to lean toward actuality, and the void, which was never truly empty, begins to fill itself with the first whispers of becoming. The night deepens. The stars, which do not yet exist, seem to turn in anticipation, and in that vast expanse of potential, the first names begin to whisper themselves into existence, not yet spoken aloud, not yet fully formed, but present, waiting, like seeds buried in the dark earth, waiting for the moment when they will be called upon to grow. In the beginning, before the beginning, chaos was born, though born is perhaps not quite the right word, for it suggests a mother and a father, a moment of creation distinct from what came before. But there was no before. There was no mother, no father, no creator standing outside the void and shaping it with divine hands. Chaos simply emerged from the infinite potential of nothingness, the way a thought emerges in the mind of a dreamer, the way a song emerges from silence, the way the first light emerges at the edge of the world when night finally releases its grip. And chaos was vast, incomprehensibly vast. Not vast in the way a mountain is vast, or an ocean, or even the sky itself, but vast in a way that transcends all measurement, all comparison, all understanding. Chaos contained within itself the infinite. It was a breathing emptiness, a pregnant void, a womb that held all possibilities and actualities at once, in a state of perfect eternal potential. To look upon chaos, had there been eyes to see it, would have been to see something that defied all description. It was not a colour, for colours had not yet been invented. It was not a sound, for sound required air and ears and the space between them. It was not a texture, nor a temperature, nor a scent. It was all of these things and none of these things. It was the raw material from which all sensation would eventually be carved. It was the silence before the first word, the darkness before the first light, the stillness before the first movement. And yet, within this vast and formless expanse, there was a kind of order. Not the order of law or structure, those would come later, and imposed by beings who would eventually learn to think and plan and build, but a natural order, the way a river naturally flows downhill, the way seeds naturally grow toward the light, the way all things naturally tend toward their own nature. Chaos had its own nature, and that nature was to contain all things, to hold all possibilities, to be the ground upon which all other being would eventually rest. Chaos was neither male nor female, though it contained the potential for both. It was neither young nor old, though it was older than age itself. It was neither alive nor dead, though it contained the seeds of all life and all death. It was the principle of becoming itself, the fundamental truth that nothing remains static, that all things flow, that transformation is the only constant in existence. And as chaos became aware of itself, as it learned to know its own nature, something remarkable occurred. The void began to breathe, not with lungs, for there were no lungs, but with the deep rhythmic pulse of pure being. Chaos breathed in, and in that inhalation it drew all potential closer to itself, condensing it, concentrating it, preparing it for what must come next. Chaos breathed out, and in that exhalation it released a portion of itself, allowing something new to emerge from its infinite depths. It was in one of these exhalations that the first true separation occurred. From the infinite potential of chaos, something began to crystallize. Something began to say, I am not chaos. I am something else. I am solid where chaos is fluid. I am defined where chaos is infinite. I am myself, and I am separate, and from this separation, all things will eventually flow. This was not a violent separation. There was no tearing, no rending, no explosion of force. It was gentle, inevitable, the way a child is born from its mother, not a severing, but an emergence, a becoming, a transformation of potential into actuality. And in that moment, the first of the primordial forces came into being. Thus chaos existed, not as destruction, but as the womb from which all creation would be born, ancient beyond time, vast beyond measure, and pregnant with infinite possibility. Chaos settled into its eternal nature, waiting for the next step in the great unfolding of existence. And from that infinite potential came the first true being, not born from chaos exactly, but emerging from it the way a wave emerges from the ocean, still part of the whole, yet distinct, separate, individual. This being was Gaia, and she was the earth itself, though the earth had not yet been formed, had not yet taken the shape and substance that would one day hold mountains and valleys, forests and deserts, all the infinite variety of the world as it would eventually come to be. Gaia's awakening was not like the awakening of a person from sleep. It was slower, deeper, more fundamental. It was the awakening of matter itself to its own existence. It was the moment when potential became actual, when the infinite became finite, when the formless began to take form. And as Gaia became aware of herself, as she learned to know her own nature, something extraordinary happened. She began to shape herself. There was no one to shape her. There was no divine craftsman standing outside her, moulding her with careful hands. Rather, Gaia shaped herself from within, the way a seed shapes itself into a tree, the way a river shapes itself into a canyon. She drew upon the infinite potential of chaos, pulling from it the substance of her being, and she organized that substance according to her own nature. And her nature was to be solid, to be real, to be the foundation upon which all other things would rest. From the depths of her being, Gaia drew forth stone and soil. She created mountains that rose up like the bones of the world, their peaks touching toward the sky that did not yet exist. She carved out valleys and plains, creating spaces where things could grow and move and be. She drew forth water, not yet organized into oceans and rivers, but present, flowing, alive with potential. And as she shaped herself, as she gave form to the formless, the cosmos began to take on structure and substance. Gaia's body was vast beyond comprehension. She was not a sphere, not yet, for geometry had not yet been invented, but she was round, in the way that all things naturally tend toward roundness, the way a drop of water becomes a sphere, the way the earth itself would eventually become round. And she was fertile, incredibly, abundantly fertile. Every part of her body was pregnant with potential, ready to give birth to the infinite variety of things that would eventually populate the world. Her surface was rough and varied. Where she was high, she was very high, mountains that scraped the sky. Where she was low, she was very low, valleys and chasms that descended into darkness. Her body was warm in some places, cold in others, dry in some regions, wet in others. She was not uniform, not symmetrical, not perfect in any mathematical sense, but she was real. She was solid. She was present in a way that chaos, for all its infinite potential, could never be. And as Gaia settled into her own being, as she became fully aware of herself, she felt something that had never been felt before. She felt alone. Not lonely exactly. Loneliness requires the knowledge of others, and there were no others yet, but alone in the way that the first conscious being in a universe must feel alone. She was the only thing in existence that was truly real, truly solid, truly separate from the infinite potential of chaos. And in that aloneness, she began to long for something, not consciously, not with thought or reason, but with the deep primal longing of her own nature. She longed for connection, for union, for something to embrace her, to hold her, to complete her. And as she felt this longing, as she opened herself to the possibility of connection, something began to stir in the void above her. Gaia spread herself across the void, her body becoming the stage upon which all dramas would unfold. She was the foundation. She was the ground. She was the first true thing in a universe that had known only potential. And she waited, patient and fertile for what must come next. But Gaia was not alone in her emergence from chaos. For as she rose up, as she gave form to herself and claimed her place in the cosmos, something else was happening in the depths. Where Gaia reached upward toward light and form and definition, something else reached downward toward darkness and formlessness and the infinite depths. And this something else was Tartarus. Tartarus was not evil. This is crucial to understand. In the ages to come, Tartarus would become known as a prison, a place of punishment, a realm of suffering and torment. But in its birth, in its first emergence from the potential of chaos, Tartarus was simply the counterbalance to Gaia. Where she was solid, it was void. Where she was light, it was dark. Where she was form, it was formlessness. And yet, like Gaia, Tartarus was real. It was present. It was a true thing in a universe that had known only potential. Tartarus descended downward, deeper and deeper, into depths that had no bottom. It was a chasm, a pit, an abyss so profound that even the concept of depth could not fully contain it. To fall into Tartarus would be to fall forever, descending through layers of darkness, through pressures that would crush any finite thing, through cold that was not merely the absence of heat but the negation of warmth itself. It was a place that seemed to have no end, no bottom, no final resting place. And yet Tartarus was not chaotic. It was not random or disordered. It had its own structure, its own nature, its own terrible beauty. The deeper one descended into Tartarus, the more ancient things became. The further down one went, the closer one came to the very origins of being, to the raw potential of chaos itself. Tartarus was like a well that descended through layers of time, through ages that had not yet been named, down to the very foundation of existence. The walls of Tartarus were smooth and hard, carved from the substance of chaos itself, polished by eons of pressure and time. They were not black exactly. Blackness is a colour, and colours had not yet been invented. But they were dark in a way that transcended colour, in a way that seemed to absorb all light, all warmth, all hope. To look upon the walls of Tartarus was to understand in some deep and primal way that there were places in the cosmos where light did not reach, where warmth did not penetrate, where the comfortable certainties of the upper world held no sway. And in those depths, in that vast and terrible darkness, there was a kind of peace. Not the peace of comfort or safety, but the peace of inevitability, the peace of something that has always been and will always be, the peace of a force that does not struggle against its own nature, that does not resist its own being, but simply exists in perfect accord with what it is. Tartarus was the deep places. Tartarus was the foundation. Tartarus was the prison that had not yet imprisoned anything, the tomb that had not yet entombed anything, the darkness that waited patiently for what must come. Between Gaia above and Tartarus below there was a kind of balance. She was the light, the form, the possibility of life and growth and becoming. It was the dark, the formlessness, the necessity of endings and descent and the return to origins. Neither was complete without the other. Neither could exist in isolation. Together, they formed the first true structure of the cosmos, a cosmos that had height and depth, light and dark, becoming and unbecoming. And as Gaia and Tartarus settled into their places, as they learned to know their own natures and their relationship to each other, the cosmos began to take on a kind of rhythm, a pulse, a breathing. The cycle of day and night, of rising and falling, of birth and death, was already encoded into the very structure of existence itself. Below Gaia's fertile body lay Tartarus, deep and dark, waiting, always waiting for its purpose to be revealed. In the vast expanse between Gaia and Tartarus, in the space that was neither earth nor abyss, something began to move. It was not a movement that could be seen, not yet. It was not a sound that could be heard, but it was present, undeniable, like the first warmth of spring after a long winter, like the first stirring of life in a seed buried deep in soil. This movement had no name, but it would come to be known as Eros. Eros was not love, at least not in the way that mortals would one day understand love. It was not the tender affection between two beings. nor the passionate desire that would later drive gods and men to extraordinary acts. Rather, Eros was the fundamental principle of attraction, the cosmic force that draws all things toward union, toward connection, toward the joining of separate things into new wholes. Eros was desire itself, not the desire of any particular being, but desire as a principle, as a force, as the very engine that drives creation forward. And Eros moved through the cosmos like a whisper, like a breath, like the first note of a song that had been waiting since the beginning of time to be sung. It touched chaos, and in that touch, the infinite potential began to quiver with the possibility of becoming. It touched Gaia, and in that touch, the solid earth began to feel the longing for connection, for union, for something to complete her. It touched Tartarus, and in that touch, the dark abyss began to understand its role, not as a prison or a punishment, but as a necessary counterbalance, a necessary depth to give meaning to the heights above. Eros was neither male nor female, though it contained the potential for both. It was neither young nor old, though it was as old as time itself, or perhaps older. It was not a being in the way that Gaia was a being, solid and present and real. Rather, Eros was a principle, a force, a fundamental truth about the nature of existence itself. It was the reason that things moved. It was the reason that things changed. It was the reason that potential yearned to become actual. And as Eros moved through the cosmos, as it touched all things and awakened in them the desire to become, something extraordinary began to happen. The three primordial forces, Chaos, Gaia, and Tartarus, began to interact with one another. They began to dance together, not in any physical sense, but in the deep, fundamental way that all things dance when they are moved by the force of Eros. Gaia felt the touch of Eros and began to long for something beyond herself. Tartarus felt the touch of Eros and began to understand that it was not separate from the rest of creation, but intimately connected to it. Chaos felt the touch of Eros and began to organize itself, to structure itself, to prepare itself for the great unfolding that was to come. And in this dance, in this cosmic interaction, the conditions for new creation began to form. Eros did not create anything directly. It didn't shape or mold or build. Rather, it inspired. It motivated. It awakened in all things the desire to become more than they were, to reach beyond themselves, to join with other things and create something new. It was the principle of becoming itself, the force that transformed potential into actuality, that changed static being into dynamic process, that made evolution and growth and transformation possible. And as Eros moved through the cosmos, touching all things, awakening all things, the universe began to fill with a kind of energy. Not the energy of heat or light or motion, though all of these would eventually emerge, but the energy of potential being realized, of possibility becoming actuality, of the infinite beginning to express itself through the finite. The cosmos began to vibrate with this energy, to hum with it, to pulse with it like a heart that has just learned to beat. And Eros moved through the void like a whisper, touching all things, awakening in them the desire to become. The night deepened. The stars, which did not yet exist, seemed to turn in anticipation. And in that vast expanse of becoming, the first names began to whisper themselves into existence. Time had not yet begun to flow, and yet something like time was beginning to emerge. The moments were not yet arranged in sequence, not yet ordered into past and future, but they were present, hovering at the edge of existence, waiting for the moment when they would be called upon to arrange themselves into the river that would carry all things forward. And in this not quite time, in this space between potential and actuality, the four primordial forces began to move together in a dance that would reshape the cosmos. Chaos, vast and infinite and pregnant with all possibility, began to organize itself around the presence of the other three. It did not lose its nature. It remained infinite, remained potential, remained the ground from which all things emerged. But it began to structure itself, to give itself form, to prepare itself for the great work of creation that was to come. It was like a musician tuning an instrument, like a craftsman preparing tools, like a mother preparing a nest for the children who would soon arrive. Gaia felt the presence of the others and began to reach upward, to stretch herself, to prepare herself for what must come. She was solid and real, but she was also incomplete. She longed for something to embrace her, to hold her, to complete her. And as she felt this longing, as she opened herself to the possibility of union, she began to understand that she was not alone in her desire, that all things, in their own way, longed for connection, for completion, for the joining together that would create something new. Tartarus, deep in its darkness, began to understand its role in the great unfolding. It was not a place of punishment or exile, not yet. It was simply the necessary depth, the necessary darkness, the necessary foundation that gave meaning to the heights above. And in understanding this, Tartarus began to settle more deeply into itself, to accept its nature, to prepare itself for the beings and forces that would eventually come to inhabit its depths. And Eros, moving through all of this, began to intensify. The desire that had been a whisper became a song. The longing that had been subtle became urgent. The pull toward union became irresistible. Eros was not satisfied with mere potential. Eros demanded actualization. Eros insisted that the infinite potential of chaos be expressed through the finite forms that were beginning to emerge. Eros was the force that would not allow the cosmos to remain static, unchanging, incomplete. In that eternal moment before time itself began to flow, the primordial forces embraced. Not physically, there were no bodies yet to embrace, but in a way that was far more profound and far more fundamental. They embraced in the way that all forces embrace when they are moved by the irresistible pull of Eros. They came together, and in their union, they created the conditions for the next great step in creation. And from that union, from that embrace of chaos and Gaia and Tartarus and Eros, something began to stir. Something began to take shape. Something began to prepare itself for birth. In the womb of chaos, in the depths of Tartarus, in the fertile body of Gaia, new beings were beginning to form, not yet born, not yet conscious, not yet aware of their own existence, but present, waiting. Ready to emerge when the moment came, the cosmos held its breath. The void trembled with anticipation. The infinite potential of chaos began to crystallize into new forms, new beings, new possibilities, and in that trembling, in that anticipation, in that crystallization, the first true generation of conscious beings began to prepare for their emergence into existence. The night deepened. The stars, which did not yet exist, seemed to turn in their invisible courses, and the tale continued, moving inexorably forward toward the moment when the Titans would be born, when the cosmos would be populated with conscious beings, when the age of pure potential would give way to the age of action and conflict, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. In that vast expanse of becoming, the first names began to whisper themselves into existence, and the cosmos, which had been silent since the beginning of time, began to learn to speak. And then it came to pass. The moment arrived when potential became actual, when the infinite expressed itself through the finite, when the first true generation of conscious beings emerged from the depths of creation. This was not a gentle emergence, nor a quiet one. It was a cosmic event, a rupture in the fabric of being itself, a moment when the universe was forever changed by the arrival of new consciousness, new will, new power. Gaia, fertile and vast, gave birth to the Titans, not one at a time as a mortal woman gives birth to children, but all at once in a great outpouring of creative force, as if the earth itself had suddenly opened and released all the beings it had been carrying in its depth since the beginning of time. 12 Titans emerged, each one vast and powerful, each one carrying within them a portion of the cosmos's purpose, each one destined to shape the world in their image. First came Oceanus and Tethys, the Titans of the waters. Oceanus was vast and flowing, like the great river that would one day encircle the world. Tethys was gentle and nurturing, the waters that would give life to all things. Together they embodied the principle of flow, of movement, of the waters that connect all things and carry all things forward. Then came Hyperion and Theia, the Titans of light. Hyperion was brilliant and radiant, carrying within him the light of the sun. Theia was luminous and shining, carrying within her the light of the moon and stars. Together they embodied the principle of illumination, of clarity, of the light that dispels darkness and reveals the true nature of all things. Then came Coeus and Phoebe, the Titans of the north and the oracle. Coeus was strong and unyielding like the northern wind. Phoebe was wise and prophetic, carrying within her the gift of foresight. Together they embodied the principle of knowledge, of the ability to see beyond the present moment into the possibilities of the future. Then came Cronus and Rhea, the Titans of time and the seasons. Cronus was powerful and commanding, carrying within him the inexorable passage of time. Rhea was fertile and nurturing, carrying within her the cycles of the seasons, the rhythm of birth and growth and decay and rebirth. Together they embodied the principle of change, of the eternal cycle that governs all existence. Then came Iapetus, the Titan of mortality. He was strong and enduring, but he carried within him the knowledge that all things must eventually pass away, that even the gods would one day face their own ending. He embodied the principle of limitation, of the boundary that separates the infinite from the finite, the eternal from the temporal. And finally came Themis, the Titaness of justice and divine law. She was wise and impartial, carrying within her the principles of order and fairness. She embodied the principle of right action, of the laws that govern the cosmos and ensure that all things move according to their proper nature. Thus the Titans came into being, each carrying within them a portion of the cosmos's purpose. And as they emerged, as they became aware of themselves and their own power, the cosmos was forever changed. Where there had been only potential, there was now actuality. Where there had been only the dance of primordial forces, there was now conscious will, deliberate action, the power to shape and mould and transform the world. The cosmos trembled at their arrival. The void shook with the force of their emergence. Gaia felt the weight of her children upon her body, and knew that she had given birth to beings who would reshape the world according to their own natures and their own desires. And in that moment, the age of the primordial forces gave way to the age of the Titans, and the first true chapter of cosmic history began to unfold. And thus the Titans came into being, each carrying within them a portion of the cosmos's purpose, each destined to shape the world in their image. The night deepened, the stars turned, and the tale continued. But the Titans were not alone in their emergence from the depths of creation. For as Gaia gave birth to the 12 Titans, she also gave birth to something else, something vast and majestic and eternal. She gave birth to Uranus, the sky itself, and he would become her consort, her partner in the great work of creation that was to unfold across the ages. Uranus was not a being in the way that the Titans were beings. He was not solid or finite or limited by the boundaries of form. Rather, he was the vast dome that stretched across the world, the infinite expanse that held all things within it. He was the sky itself, eternal and unchanging, remote and majestic, looking down upon all things with the gaze of something that had always been and would always be. And yet Uranus was conscious. He was aware. He knew his own nature and his own power. He understood that he was the counterpart to Gaia, that together they formed a complete cosmos, that their union was necessary for all things to exist and flourish. And so Uranus stretched himself across the heavens, spreading his vast form over the body of Gaia, embracing her, holding her, pressing her beneath his star-studded body night after night, age after age, in an eternal act of creation and renewal. The relationship between Uranus and Gaia was intimate and distant at once. He was always present, always watching, always embracing her, and yet he was remote, separated from her by the vast distance of the sky, never truly touching her, except in those moments when night fell, and he descended to hold her in his arms. It was a relationship of longing and fulfillment, of separation and union, of the eternal cycle of day and night, of the seasons turning endlessly in their prescribed patterns, and in their union, in their embrace, new things were constantly being created. The Titans themselves had been born from this union. But there were other beings as well, the cyclopes with their single eyes that could see into the depths of things. The hecatoncheires, the 100-handed giants, with their 50 heads and their 100 arms, beings of such terrible power that even Uranus himself would come to fear them. And there were others, lesser beings, spirits and forces that emerged from the creative union of sky and earth. Uranus stretched across the heavens, eternal and remote, embracing Gaia each night, and in their union the cosmos found its rhythm. Day followed night, night followed day. The seasons turned in their prescribed order. The stars wheeled through their courses. All things moved according to the patterns that had been established by the union of sky and earth. It was a cosmos of order and regularity, of predictability and law. It was a cosmos that seemed as if it would endure forever, unchanging and eternal. And yet, even in this golden age, even in this time of perfect order and harmony, there were seeds of discord being sown. For Uranus, for all his majesty and power, was not a just ruler. He was not a kind father to his children. As the Titans grew in power, as the cyclopes and hecatoncheires developed their terrible strength, Uranus began to feel something that had never been felt before in the cosmos. He began to feel fear, fear of his children, fear of their power, fear that they might one day challenge his authority, that they might seek to overthrow him, that they might take from him the throne of the cosmos that he had held since the beginning of time. And this fear, this terrible gnawing fear, would lead Uranus to do things that would set in motion the great cycles of conflict and overthrow that would define the ages to come. But that tale would come later. For now, Uranus remained supreme, the undisputed ruler of the cosmos, the eternal sky that held all things within its embrace. The night deepened, the stars turned, and the tale continued, moving inexorably toward the moment when fear would transform into action, when paranoia would lead to tyranny, when the age of Uranus would begin its slow descent toward its inevitable end. From the union of Uranus and Gaia came beings unlike any that had emerged before. These were not the orderly, comprehensible titans with their clear domains and their defined roles in the cosmos. These were beings of such terrible power, such alien form, such overwhelming strength that they seemed to belong to a different order of creation entirely. These were the cyclopes and the hecatoncheires, and their emergence would shake the cosmos to its foundations. The cyclopes were 3 in number: Brontes, whose name meant thunder, Sterops, whose name meant lightning, and Arges, whose name meant brightness. Each of them possessed a single eye, vast and luminous, set in the centre of their foreheads like a burning star. This eye was not merely an organ of sight, it was a window into the depths of things, a lens through which the hidden nature of all creation could be perceived. With their single eyes, the cyclopes could see into stone and metal, could understand the deep structures of matter itself, could perceive the fundamental forces that held the cosmos together. The cyclopes were not tall, as the titans were tall, but they were immensely powerful, with shoulders broad as mountains and arms thick as the trunks of ancient trees. Their hands were skilled and precise, capable of the most delicate work and the most tremendous feats of strength. They were craftsmen by nature, beings who understood the principles of creation and construction, who could take raw materials and transform them into objects of power and beauty. But if the cyclopes were strange and powerful, the hecatoncheires were stranger still, and more powerful by far. There were 3 of them, Briareus, Cottus, and Gyges. Each of them possessed 50 heads and 100 arms. 50 heads meant 50 minds, 50 sets of eyes, 50 mouths capable of speech and song and terrible cries. 100 arms meant 100 hands, 100 points of contact with the world, 100 ways to grasp and hold and manipulate and transform. They were beings of such overwhelming complexity, such bewildering multiplicity, that to look upon them was to feel the mind strain against the boundaries of comprehension. The hecatoncheires were not craftsmen like the cyclopes. They were warriors, beings of pure power and strength. Each of their 100 arms was capable of lifting mountains. Each of their 50 heads possessed its own will, its own consciousness, and yet all of these wills were unified, directed toward a single purpose. When they moved, the earth shook. When they spoke, their voices echoed across the cosmos like thunder. When they fought, they were nearly unstoppable, nearly invincible, beings whose power seemed to transcend all normal limitations. These beings of terrible beauty emerged from Gaia's body, and the cosmos trembled at their arrival. For the first time since creation had begun, there existed beings whose power rivaled that of the primordial forces themselves. The Titans, for all their strength and their dominion over their respective domains, were not as powerful as the Cyclopes and hecatoncheires. And this disparity in power, this emergence of beings who seemed to transcend the normal order of things, filled the cosmos with a kind of awe and a kind of dread. Gaia looked upon her children, all of them, Titans and Cyclopes and hecatoncheires alike, and she felt a mother's pride and a mother's fear. Pride in their strength, their beauty, their power. But fear too, for she sensed that the emergence of these beings had changed something fundamental about the cosmos. The age of simple order was ending. The age of complexity and conflict was beginning. And she knew, in the deep way that mothers know such things, that her children would not all live in harmony, that there would be struggles, conflicts, the clash of wills and powers that would reshape the cosmos again and again. and Uranus, looking down from his throne in the sky, felt only fear. Fear of these beings who were so powerful, so strange, so utterly beyond his control. Fear that they might one day challenge his authority. Fear that they might seek to overthrow him and take his throne, and this fear would lead him to do something terrible, something that would set in motion the great cycles of revenge and counter-revenge that would define the ages to come. These beings of terrible beauty emerged from Gaia's body, and the cosmos trembled at their arrival, for they were unlike anything that had come before. Uranus looked down from his throne in the sky and saw what Gaia had created, and in that moment something shifted in the heart of the cosmos. Where there had been order, there was now the possibility of chaos. Where there had been harmony, there was now the potential for conflict. And Uranus, who had ruled unopposed since the beginning of time, felt the first true shadow fall across his reign. He called to Gaia, and his voice was no longer the gentle voice of a lover. It was the voice of a ruler, cold and commanding. He demanded that she imprison the cyclopes and the hecatoncheires, that she lock them away in the deepest places, that she remove them from the world where they might one day threaten his authority. And Gaia, who loved her children, who had carried them in her depths and given birth to them with joy, felt her heart break at this command. But Uranus was the sky. Uranus was vast and powerful and eternal, and he was afraid. And fear in the heart of a powerful being is a terrible thing. It twists reason, it corrupts justice, it transforms love into paranoia and care into cruelty. And so Uranus forced his will upon Gaia, and she was compelled to obey. The cyclopes and the hecatoncheires were seized and dragged down, down, down into the deepest places. They were forced into Tartarus, that vast abyss that lay beneath the world, that realm of darkness and pressure and infinite depth. Tartarus, which had been waiting since the beginning of time for its purpose to be revealed, now received its first prisoners. Massive chains were forged, by whom the tales do not say, perhaps by forces older than the gods themselves, and these chains bound the cyclopes and the hecatoncheires in the darkness, holding them fast, preventing them from ever returning to the upper world. And Gaia felt the wound of this act. She felt it as a mother feels the separation from her children. She felt it as the earth feels a wound torn in her body. She felt it as a fundamental violation of the natural order, a perversion of the creative force that had brought these beings into existence. The pain of it ran through her, from her highest mountains to her deepest valleys. The pain of it echoed in every stone, every stream, every growing thing. And in her pain, Gaia's heart hardened, not toward her imprisoned children. She loved them still and would never stop loving them. But toward Uranus, toward the sky that had once been her lover and was now her oppressor, she looked at him with new eyes, eyes full of sorrow and anger and a terrible resolve, and she began to think thoughts that had never been thought before in the cosmos, thoughts of resistance, thoughts of overthrow, thoughts of justice. For what Uranus had done was unjust. The cyclopes and hecatoncheires had done nothing wrong. They'd committed no crime, violated no law, threatened no one. Their only offence was to exist, to be powerful, to be different from the Titans, and for this they'd been imprisoned in darkness, separated from the light, cut off from the world that had given them birth. Gaia knew that this injustice could not stand. She knew that the natural order of the cosmos demanded that wrongs be righted, that the imprisoned be freed, that tyranny be overthrown. And so she began to plan. She began to think of how she might free her children. She began to consider which of her other children might be willing to help her, which of the Titans might be strong enough and brave enough to challenge the authority of Uranus himself. And as Gaia thought these thoughts, as she nursed her wound and her anger, something began to change in the cosmos. The age of Uranus's unopposed rule was drawing to a close. The age of his downfall was beginning to take shape, still distant, still hidden in the future, but inevitable as the turning of seasons, as certain as the rising and setting of the sun. And Gaia felt the wound of her children's imprisonment, and in her heart a resolve began to crystallize that this age of Uranus must end. The night deepened, the stars turned, and the tale continued toward its reckoning. Among all the Titans there was one who stood apart. His name was Cronus, and he was the youngest of the 12, born last from the union of Uranus and Gaia. But what he lacked in age, he made up for in ambition, in cunning, in the terrible clarity of will that marks those destined to reshape the world. Cronus looked upon his imprisoned siblings, upon the wound in his mother's heart, and he understood what must be done. Gaia came to Cronus in secret, in a place where Uranus could not hear, where the sky could not see. And she spoke to him of her pain, of the injustice that had been done, of the need for someone to act, to resist, to overthrow the tyrant who ruled from above. And Cronus listened, and in his heart ambition stirred. He saw in this moment the opportunity to seize power, to take the throne of the cosmos for himself, to become the ruler of all things. But Cronus was not strong enough to challenge Uranus directly. The sky was vast and eternal and immensely powerful. No single being, no matter how mighty, could stand against him in open combat. And so Gaia gave Cronus a gift, a weapon of terrible power, forged from adamantine, the hardest substance in all of creation. It was a sickle, curved and sharp with an edge that could cut through anything, even the flesh of a god. And Gaia told Cronus what he must do. The plan was set. Cronus would hide himself in the darkness, in the place between earth and sky, in that liminal space where neither Uranus nor Gaia held complete dominion. And when Uranus came down to embrace Gaia, as he did every night, Cronus would strike. He would use the adamantine sickle to castrate his father, to sever him from his power, to remove him from the throne that he had held since the beginning of time. It was a terrible plan, a violation of every natural law, a crime against the very order of creation itself, and yet it was necessary. For tyranny, once established, can only be overcome through force, and injustice, once entrenched, can only be corrected through acts that themselves seem unjust. This is the terrible paradox at the heart of all revolution, all overthrow, all transformation of the old order into the new. And so Cronus waited, hiding in the darkness, the adamantine sickle clutched in his hand, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. He waited for night to fall, for Uranus to descend from his throne in the sky, for the moment when his father would be vulnerable, when the eternal sky would be close enough to touch, close enough to strike. And then it came. Night fell. Uranus descended as he always did to embrace Gaia, and in that moment Cronus struck. The adamantine sickle flashed through the darkness, and the blade bit deep. There was a cry, not of pain exactly, for gods do not feel pain as mortals do, but of shock, of outrage, of the terrible knowledge that one's own child had turned against one, that the natural order had been violated, that the reign of Uranus was ending. The blood of Uranus fell upon the earth, and from that blood terrible things were born. The Furies emerged, born of vengeance, their eyes burning with the need to punish those who had committed crimes against their own kin. Aphrodite rose from the white foam of his blood, goddess of love and desire, who would later cause kings to fall and empires to burn, and the giants emerged, born of rage, beings of terrible power and terrible hunger, who would one day challenge the gods themselves. And Uranus, castrated and defeated, was driven from the sky. He retreated into the upper reaches of the cosmos, into the most distant places, where he would remain for all eternity, a broken god, a dethroned ruler, a warning to all who would hold power through tyranny and fear. Thus fell Uranus, and from his blood and seed new beings emerged. And Cronus took the throne, and the age of the Titans truly began. Cronus sat upon the throne of the cosmos, and the universe held its breath, waiting to see what kind of ruler he would be. Would he be just, or would he follow in the footsteps of his father, ruling through fear and tyranny? Would he free the imprisoned cyclopes and hecatoncheires, or would he leave them in their chains? The cosmos waited, suspended in anticipation, as Cronus took the measure of his new power. And in those first ages, Cronus proved to be a different kind of ruler than Uranus had been. He was not gentle, not kind, not merciful in the way that mortals might understand mercy, but he was just in his own way. He established laws and principles by which the cosmos would be governed. He distributed power among the Titans, giving each of them dominion over their own domain. Oceanus ruled the waters, Hyperion ruled the light. Themis watched over justice and divine law. Each Titan had their place, their purpose, their role in the great machinery of creation, and under the rule of Cronus, the cosmos flourished. It was a golden age, a time of peace and plenty, a time when all things seemed to move in harmony according to the principles that Cronus had established. The earth brought forth abundance, the waters flowed in their proper courses, the light and darkness alternated in their prescribed rhythms. All things were in their proper places, and all things knew their purpose. Cronus took as his consort Rhea, one of the Titans, and together they ruled from their throne, overseeing the cosmos, ensuring that all things moved according to law and order. Rhea was fertile and nurturing, and she bore Cronus many children: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. These would become the first generation of the Olympians, though they did not yet know it, though they did not yet understand the role they would play in the ages to come. But even in this golden age, even as Cronus ruled justly and the cosmos flourished, there was a shadow, a dark knowledge that Cronus carried in his heart, a prophecy that had been whispered to him by the fates themselves, those ancient beings who knew the future as mortals know the present. The prophecy was simple and terrible. Cronus would be overthrown by one of his own children. Just as he had overthrown his father Uranus, so too would one of his sons rise up and cast him down, taking the throne of the cosmos for himself. This knowledge gnawed at Cronus. It poisoned his joy in his rule. It transformed his justice into paranoia. He began to fear his own children, to see in them not the promise of the future but the threat of his own downfall. And so Cronus did something terrible. As each of his children was born, he took them from Rhea's arms and swallowed them whole, imprisoning them in his own body, preventing them from ever growing to maturity, preventing them from ever becoming strong enough to challenge his authority. One by one, the children of Cronus and Rhea disappeared into his belly. Hestia was swallowed, Demeter was swallowed, Hera was swallowed, Hades was swallowed, Poseidon was swallowed. Each time Rhea felt the pain of separation, the agony of having her children torn from her and consumed by the being she loved. Each time she wept, but there was nothing she could do. Cronus was the king, and his will was law, and so the age of Cronus continued, orderly and just on the surface, but rotting from within with paranoia and fear. The cosmos was ruled by a tyrant who had become convinced that his own children were his enemies, who had imprisoned them in his own body to prevent them from fulfilling a prophecy that he could not escape. It was a golden age, yes, but it was a golden age built on a foundation of fear and injustice, and such foundations cannot endure forever. And Cronus ruled from his throne, and the Titans brought order to the cosmos. Yet even in this golden age shadows gathered, for Cronus knew that fate had written his downfall, and he could not escape it. The night deepened, the stars turned, and in the hidden places, in the spaces where even a king's paranoia could not reach, the seeds of his overthrow were already being sown. In a hidden place, far from the throne of Cronus, far from the watchful eyes of the paranoid king, something was stirring. Rhea, the Titaness queen, had become pregnant once more, and this time she was determined that her child would not be swallowed, would not be imprisoned in the darkness of Cronus's belly, would not be denied the chance to live and grow and become. This time she would outwit the king. This time she would preserve her child no matter what the cost. As the time of birth drew near, Rhea fled to the island of Crete, to a place hidden deep within mountains, to a cave where the light of day barely penetrated, and where Cronus's gaze could not easily reach. It was a place of ancient power, a place where the boundaries between worlds grew thin, where the old magic of chaos still lingered in the stones and the soil. And it was here, in this hidden sanctuary, that Rhea gave birth to a son. She named him Zeus. Zeus was born into darkness, into secrecy, into a world that did not yet know of his existence. His first cries echoed through the cave, and Rhea held him close, marvelling at his strength, at the power that seemed to radiate from his tiny body. She knew, in the way that mothers know such things, that this child was destined for greatness, that he would reshape the cosmos, that he would one day challenge the throne of his father and claim it for himself. But Rhea also knew that Cronus would come looking for this child, that the king would not rest until he had found and swallowed this last offspring, and so she devised a plan, a deception so clever that even the paranoid mind of Cronus could not see through it. She took a stone, wrapped it in swaddling clothes, and presented it to Cronus as if it were the newborn child. And Cronus, his mind clouded by fear and paranoia, did not look closely enough to see the deception. He took the wrapped stone from Rhea's arms and swallowed it whole, believing that he had consumed his final child, believing that he had secured his throne against the prophecy. But Zeus remained hidden in the cave on Crete, safe from his father's hunger, safe from the darkness of his father's belly. And there, in that secret place, he was cared for by beings of ancient power. The nymphs of the mountain came to him, bringing him food and water, singing to him, teaching him the ways of the world. The Curetes, warriors of divine origin, stood guard at the entrance to the cave, their shields raised, their spears ready. And when Zeus cried out, when his infant voice echoed through the cavern, the Curetes would bang their shields together, creating a tremendous noise that would drown out the sound of the baby's cries, preventing any spy or servant of Cronus from hearing and discovering the hiding place. The milk that nourished Zeus came from Amalthea, a divine goat whose generosity was legendary. Her milk was rich and sweet and filled with power, and it caused Zeus to grow strong, to develop quickly, to become more than an ordinary child. With each passing day, with each feeding, Zeus grew stronger. His limbs became more powerful, his mind became sharper, his will became more determined. He was being prepared, though he did not yet know it, for the great struggle that lay ahead of him. And in the darkness of the cave, in the safety of his hidden sanctuary, Zeus grew in secret. He learned to speak, to think, to understand the nature of power and the cosmos in which he lived. He learned from the nymphs and the curates, from the ancient magic that lingered in the stones, from the very earth itself. He learned that his father was a tyrant, that his siblings were imprisoned, that the cosmos was ruled by fear and paranoia, and he learned that one day, when he was strong enough, when the time was right, he would have to challenge his father and free his siblings and transform the cosmos itself. And in a hidden cave beneath the earth, Zeus grew in secret, nourished by the milk of Amalthea the goat, guarded by the curates, destined for a greatness he could not yet comprehend. The night deepened, the stars turned in their invisible courses, and the tale moved inexorably toward the moment when the hidden child would emerge, when the secret would be revealed, when the age of Cronus would begin its descent toward its inevitable end. The years passed, though years are a strange measure of time in the realm of the gods, where a single moment can contain an age and an age can pass in what seems like a heartbeat. Zeus grew in his hidden cave, and with each passing season he became stronger, wiser, more aware of his own destiny. The nymphs who cared for him taught him the secrets of the earth and the sky. The curate trained him in the arts of war and strategy. And the ancient magic of the mountain itself seemed to flow through his veins, awakening powers that had never before been seen in the cosmos. Zeus was not like other children. Even as an infant, even as a young god still learning the ways of the world, he possessed a quality that set him apart, a kind of inevitability, a sense that he was meant for something greater than ordinary existence. When he spoke, his voice carried weight and authority. When he moved, it was with the grace and power of one who understood his own strength. When he looked at the world, it was with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things, into the hidden depths where true power resided. The nymphs brought him food and drink, but Zeus needed less nourishment than ordinary beings. The milk of Amalthea sustained him, yes, but it was not merely physical sustenance that he required. He fed on knowledge, on understanding, on the gradual awakening of his own power. Each day he grew stronger. Each day his mind became sharper. Each day his will became more focused, more determined, more certain of its own purpose. And as Zeus grew, he began to understand the nature of his imprisonment, for that is what his hiding place was, despite its safety and comfort. He was imprisoned by circumstance, by the need to remain hidden, by the paranoia of his father that had forced him into exile before he had even truly lived. And he began to understand too the nature of the injustice that had been done. His siblings swallowed by Cronus, imprisoned in darkness within their father's body. The cyclopes and hecatoncheires, chained in Tartarus, separated from the light and the world that had given them birth. All of this was wrong. All of this was a violation of the natural order, a perversion of justice, a tyranny that could not be allowed to continue. But Zeus was patient. He did not rage against his confinement or demand immediate action. Rather, he waited, knowing that the time would come when he would be ready, when his strength would be sufficient, when the moment would be right for him to emerge from his hiding place and challenge his father's rule. He understood, in the way that the young sometimes understand things that the old have forgotten, that some things cannot be rushed, that some victories must be earned through patience and preparation, not through hasty action and reckless courage. In the cave, Zeus began to study the nature of power itself. He learned from Metis, the titaness of wisdom, who came to him in secret, bringing him knowledge of the cosmos, teaching him the principles by which all things were governed. Metis was not bound by loyalty to Cronus as the other titans were. She saw in the young Zeus something that the paranoid king could never see: the possibility of a better order, a more just rule, a cosmos governed by wisdom rather than by fear. And as Zeus studied with Metis, as he learned the deep secrets of creation and power, he began to formulate a plan that would require cunning as well as strength, wisdom as well as courage, patience as well as determination. A plan that would free his siblings, overthrow his father, and transform the cosmos itself. But the time for action was not yet. First, he had to grow strong enough. First, he had to gather allies. First, he had to wait for the moment when the cosmos itself would be ready for transformation. And Zeus grew strong in his hidden place, nourished by the milk of Amalthea, taught by the nymphs and the curates and the wise metis, destined for a greatness that was beginning to take shape in his mind like a sculpture emerging from stone. The cosmos held its breath, waiting for the day when he would emerge to claim his birthright, and in the depths of Tartarus, in the chains that bound them, the cyclopes and hecatoncheires sensed that something was changing, that a new age was stirring in the womb of time, that their imprisonment might one day come to an end. And Zeus grew strong in his hidden place, and the cosmos held its breath, waiting for the day when he would emerge to claim his birthright. The moment came when Zeus had grown strong enough, when his mind was sharp enough, when his will was focused enough to challenge his father's rule. But strength alone would not be sufficient. Cronus was ancient and powerful, and he had ruled the cosmos since the beginning of the Titan Age. To overcome him would require not just might, but cunning. It would require wisdom. It would require a trick so clever that even the paranoid mind of the king could not anticipate it. And so Zeus turned to Metis, the titaness of wisdom, the keeper of secrets, the one who understood the hidden workings of the cosmos better than any other being. Metis looked at the young god, and she saw in him the possibility of a new order, a cosmos governed by justice rather than by fear, by wisdom rather than by paranoia. And she agreed to help him. Together, they devised a plan. Metis would create a potion, a draught of such subtle power that it would pass undetected through even the most vigilant guard, that it would seem like nothing more than ordinary wine or water, but when consumed, it would have a single, devastating effect. It would cause Cronus to vomit, to expel everything that he had consumed and imprisoned within his body. It would free the imprisoned titans. It would restore them to the world of light and air and consciousness. But there was a problem. How could they get Cronus to drink the potion? The king was suspicious, paranoid, always watching for threats. He would not simply accept a drink from a stranger. He would not trust anything that came to him without explanation. And so Metis devised a second part of the plan, a deception within the deception, a trick within the trick. Metis would present herself to Cronus not as an enemy, but as a servant, a being who wished to serve the king, who had come to offer him gifts and honours. And in the guise of this servant she would offer him the potion, disguised as a gift of wine, as a token of respect and loyalty. Cronus, his mind clouded by his own sense of superiority, his confidence in his own power, would accept the gift without suspicion. He would drink the potion, and then the transformation would begin. And so the plan was set in motion. Zeus emerged from his hiding place for the first time, stepping out of the cave on Crete and into the wider world. He was no longer a child, though he was still young by the standards of the gods. He was no longer weak or uncertain. He was strong and determined and ready for the great struggle that lay ahead. And he made his way to the throne of Cronus, to the place where his father ruled, to the moment when everything would change. Metis went before him, disguised, hidden, moving through the cosmos like a whisper, like a shadow, like a thought that had not yet been fully formed. She came to Cronus bearing gifts, speaking words of flattery and respect, offering the potion in a golden cup, presenting it as a token of honour to the great king. And Cronus, his mind clouded by centuries of unchallenged rule, accepted the gift. He raised the cup to his lips. He drank. For a moment, nothing happened. The potion was subtle, its effects not immediate. But then, deep within Cronus's body, something began to shift. The magic of the draught began to work, loosening the bonds that held his swallowed children imprisoned within him, preparing them for expulsion, readying them for their return to the world of light. And then it began. Cronus felt a terrible sensation in his belly, a churning, a convulsion, a force that seemed to be tearing him apart from within. He cried out, a sound of rage and pain and shock, and from his mouth came the contents of his stomach. Out came Hestia, whole and alive, gasping for breath, reborn into the world. Out came Demeter, her eyes wide with wonder and confusion. Out came Hera, shaking, disoriented, but alive. Out came Hades, emerging from the darkness into the light for the first time since his birth. And finally out came Poseidon, the last of the swallowed children, whole and complete and ready to take his place in the cosmos. And from Cronus's mouth came his children, whole and alive, and they looked upon Zeus with wonder and gratitude, knowing that he had freed them from the darkness of their father's belly. The night deepened. The stars turned, and the moment of reckoning had arrived. The freed Titans emerged into the light, and for the first time in ages they could see the cosmos as it truly was. They could feel the warmth of the sun on their skin. They could breathe the air of the upper world. They could move freely, without constraint, without imprisonment. And they looked upon Zeus, the brother they had never known, the one who had freed them from their father's darkness, and they understood immediately that he was their leader, that he was the one who would guide them forward, that he was the one destined to reshape the cosmos. But Zeus knew that the freed Titans alone would not be enough to challenge Cronus and the other Titans who remained loyal to the king. He needed more power. He needed allies. And so he turned his attention to Tartarus, to the deepest places, to the beings who had been imprisoned there since the beginning of the Titan Age. He needed the cyclopes. He needed the hecatoncheires. Zeus descended into Tartarus, into the darkness and the cold and the terrible pressure of the deep places. He came to the chains that bound the cyclopes, and he broke them. He came to the bonds that held the hecatoncheires, and he severed them. And as he freed these beings, as he brought them up from the darkness into the light, he made them a promise. He told them that if they would fight with him, if they would stand against Cronus and the Titans, he would ensure that they were honoured, that they were given a place of power in the new cosmos that would emerge from the ashes of the old. The Cyclopes, grateful for their freedom, grateful for the chance to see the light again, agreed immediately. And they set to work at once, using their skill and their knowledge of the deep structures of matter itself. They forged a weapon of unimaginable power. They took lightning from the sky and thunder from the clouds and the raw force of cosmic energy itself, and they shaped it into a weapon that had never before existed in the cosmos. They called it the thunderbolt, and they gave it to Zeus. The thunderbolt was not merely a weapon. It was a symbol of power, a manifestation of the fundamental forces of creation itself. When Zeus held it in his hand, when he felt its weight and its power, he understood that he now possessed something that could rival even the ancient authority of Cronus. The thunderbolt burned with divine fire. It crackled with energy. It was a weapon that could shake the foundations of the cosmos itself. The hecatoncheires, freed from their chains, flexed their 100 arms and felt the joy of movement after ages of imprisonment. They were beings of such terrible power that even the Titans feared them. With their 50 heads and their 100 arms, they could fight with a coordination and a strength that no ordinary being could match. They pledged themselves to Zeus, understanding that he alone had the wisdom and the courage to lead them, that he alone could give their power purpose and direction. And Zeus stood before his allies, his freed siblings, the grateful cyclopes, the mighty hecatoncheires, and he looked upon them, and he knew that he was ready. The time had come to challenge his father. The time had come to overthrow the rule of Cronus. The time had come to transform the cosmos itself. But first, he had to gather one more thing. He had to gather the will to do what must be done. He had to accept that the coming conflict would be terrible, that beings would be destroyed, that the cosmos itself would be shaken to its foundations. He had to understand that sometimes the only way to create a new order is to destroy the old one completely. And he had to accept that he, Zeus, would have to be the one to lead this destruction, to bear the weight of it, to carry the burden of it for all eternity. And Zeus stood before his allies, and in his hand burned the thunderbolt, and the hecatoncheires flexed their 100 arms, and the cosmos trembled, knowing that the age of the Titans was drawing to its close. The night deepened, the stars turned, and the moment of war was approaching, inevitable as the turning of seasons, certain as the rising and setting of the sun. And then it came to pass. The moment that had been building since the beginning of time, the conflict that had been written into the very fabric of creation itself, finally erupted into being. Zeus led his forces against Cronus and the Titans, and the cosmos became a battlefield unlike anything that had ever existed before. This was not a conflict between mortals, limited and brief. This was a conflict between gods, between beings of immense power, between forces that could reshape the very foundations of existence itself. This was the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, and it would rage across the cosmos for 10 long years. The first clashes were terrible and magnificent. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts at Cronus, and they lit up the sky like stars being born. The lightning crackled and burned, and where it struck, the very substance of reality seemed to shatter and reform. Cronus met the thunderbolts with his own power, with the ancient authority that he had wielded since the beginning of the Titan Age, and the two forces collided in the upper reaches of the cosmos, creating explosions of energy that echoed across all of creation. Poseidon, freed from his father's belly, discovered his dominion over the seas and the earthquakes. He raised his trident and struck the earth, and mountains trembled. The oceans rose up in waves as tall as mountains themselves, and the very ground beneath the feet of the combatants shook and cracked. Hades, emerging into the light for the first time, discovered his connection to the underworld and the hidden places, and he moved through the battlefield like a shadow, like a thought that could not be grasped, striking at the Titans from places they could not anticipate. The Titans fought with the desperation of those who knew they were fighting for their very survival. Hyperion unleashed the power of light itself, creating blazes so bright that they seemed to burn away the fabric of space. Oceanus, though he remained largely neutral in the conflict, still possessed the power of the waters, and he used it to create barriers and obstacles trying to prevent the complete destruction of the cosmos. Themis, the Titaness of justice, stood apart from the battle, watching, waiting, understanding that the outcome was already written in the laws of fate itself. But the hecatoncheires were unstoppable. With their 50 heads and their 100 arms, they hurled boulders the size of mountains at the Titans. They moved with a coordination and a power that seemed to transcend the normal limitations of combat. Where they went, the Titans fell back. Where they struck, the very earth seemed to crack open. They were beings of such overwhelming strength that even the ancient power of the Titans could not stand against them for long. The war raged on, year after year, age after age. The cosmos became a place of chaos and destruction. Mountains were thrown down and rebuilt. Oceans were displaced and reformed. The very stars seemed to shake in their courses as the forces of creation and destruction clashed again and again. Neither side could claim complete victory. Neither side could force the other into final defeat. It was a stalemate, a grinding, terrible stalemate, where both sides possessed enough power to prevent the other from winning, but not enough power to achieve victory themselves. And then, in the 10th year of the war, something changed. The hecatoncheires, who had been fighting with all their power but had not yet unleashed their full strength, began to move with a new intensity, a new focus, a new determination. They had been waiting, holding back, saving their greatest power for the moment when it would be most needed. And that moment had come. The cosmos trembled at their arrival. The void shook with the force of their emergence into full combat. They hurled boulders the size of mountains, and the Titans fell back, their defences crumbling, their ancient power proving insufficient against this onslaught of overwhelming strength. The war raged across the cosmos, and the stars themselves seemed to shake, and neither side could claim victory, for the Titans were ancient and strong, and the Olympians were fierce and determined. It was in the 10th year of the war, when both sides had grown weary, when the cosmos itself seemed to be wearing thin under the strain of endless conflict, that the hecatoncheires finally rose up and unleashed their full power. For 9 years they had fought with strength and skill, but they had held something back, some reserve of power that they had been saving for this moment, this crucial turning point, this instant when the fate of the cosmos hung in perfect balance. Briareus, mightiest of the three, raised all 50 of his heads and opened all 50 of his mouths, and from those mouths came a cry so terrible that it echoed across the entire cosmos. It was not a cry of pain or fear, but a cry of pure, overwhelming power, a sound that seemed to contain within it the force of creation itself. And as that cry echoed, Briareus raised his 100 arms, and with each arm he grasped a boulder the size of a mountain, and he began to hurl them at the Titans with a speed and a force that seemed to transcend all natural law. Cottus and Gyges, his brothers, rose up beside him, and they too unleashed their full power. 300 arms, 150 heads, all moving in perfect coordination, all focused on a single purpose: the overthrow of the Titans, the victory of the Olympians, the transformation of the cosmos itself. The boulders fell like rain, like a storm that had no end, like the very substance of the universe being hurled back and forth across the void. The Titans fell back before this onslaught. Cronus, for all his ancient power, for all his authority and his skill, found himself unable to withstand the overwhelming force of the hecatoncheires. His thunderbolts, which had seemed so powerful moments before, now seemed insignificant against the sheer scale of the assault. The mountains that the hecatoncheires hurled were so vast that they seemed to blot out the light of the stars. The force of their impacts was so tremendous that it seemed to shake the very foundations of existence. One by one, the Titans began to fall. Hyperion was struck by a boulder the size of a continent and driven down, down, down into the depths. Oceanus, seeing that the battle was lost, withdrew from the conflict, retreating into the waters, choosing neutrality over destruction. Themis, the Titaness of justice, did not resist when Zeus approached her. She understood that the old order was ending, that a new order was being born, that the laws of fate had determined the outcome of this war long before it had begun. Cronus felt the weight of destiny upon him. He understood, in that moment, that he could not win, that no matter how hard he fought, no matter how much power he wielded, the outcome was already determined. The prophecy that had haunted him since the beginning of his reign was finally being fulfilled. His son was overthrowing him, just as he had overthrown his father Uranus. The cycle was continuing, the eternal pattern of father and son, of old order and new order, of the endless transformation of the cosmos. And then came the final blow. Cronus faced Zeus in direct combat, the king of the Titans against the rising king of the Olympians, the old order against the new. They clashed, and for a moment, it seemed as if Cronus might prevail, as if the ancient power of the Titans might prove sufficient after all. But then Zeus raised the thunderbolt, and he hurled it with all the power that the cyclopes had forged into it, and the bolt struck Cronus with a force that seemed to tear him apart from within. Cronus fell. He fell down, 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 into the depths of Tartarus, into the very abyss where his own children had been imprisoned. And as he fell, the other Titans, who had not already been defeated, were seized by the hecatoncheires and cast down after him. Massive chains were forged, by the cyclopes themselves perhaps, or by forces older than the gods, and these chains bound the Titans in Tartarus, holding them fast, preventing them from ever returning to the upper world, ensuring that they could never again threaten the rule of the Olympians. And the hecatoncheires rose up, and with their 100 arms they hurled boulders the size of mountains, and the Titans fell back, and Cronus felt the weight of fate upon him, and knew that his age had ended. The night deepened, the stars turned, and the age of the Titans was no more. The war was over, the Titanomachy had ended, and the cosmos fell silent. Not the silence of peace exactly, but the silence of exhaustion, of a great work completed, of the moment after the storm when the world is still and waiting to see what will emerge from the destruction. The Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, bound by chains that could not be broken, sealed away in the darkness where they would remain for all eternity. The old order had been overthrown. The new order was beginning to take shape. Zeus stood upon the throne of the cosmos, and he looked out upon the realm that he had conquered, and he understood that the true work was only now beginning. Winning a war was one thing, establishing a lasting peace, creating a new order that would endure, distributing power in a way that was just and wise, these were far more difficult tasks, and so Zeus called together his siblings, the freed Titans who had become his allies, and the Cyclopes and hecatoncheires, and he began the great work of reorganizing the cosmos. First, Zeus took for himself the dominion over the sky, and the thunder, over the clouds and the lightning, over justice and order and the rule of law. He would be the king of the gods, the supreme authority, the one to whom all others would answer. But he understood that he could not rule alone, that power must be distributed, that each being must have their own domain, their own purpose, their own role in the great machinery of creation. To Poseidon, his brother Zeus gave dominion over the seas and the waters. Poseidon would rule the oceans, would command the waves and the tides, would be the god of earthquakes and the trembling earth. He would carry the trident as his symbol of power, and all the creatures of the sea would answer to his call. Poseidon accepted this gift with gratitude, understanding that he had been given a domain worthy of his power and his skill. To Hades, his other brother, Zeus gave dominion over the underworld, over death and the realm of the dead. Hades would rule the deep places, would oversee the passage of souls from the world of the living to the world of the dead, would be the keeper of secrets and the guardian of the hidden places. It was not a domain that many would have chosen, but Hades accepted it with dignity, understanding that death was as necessary as life, that the underworld was as important as the upper world, that his role was essential to the functioning of the cosmos. To Hera, his sister, Zeus gave dominion over marriage and the family, over the bonds that held beings together, over the cycles of birth and growth and nurturing. Hera would be the queen of the gods, the partner of Zeus, the one who would oversee the sacred bonds that held all things in relationship to one another. And Zeus took Hera as his consort, and together they would rule from Mount Olympus. To Hestia, his sister, Zeus gave dominion over the hearth and the home, over the sacred fires that warm the dwellings of gods and mortals alike. Hestia would be the keeper of the home, the guardian of family bonds, the one who ensured that all beings had a place of safety and warmth to return to. She accepted this gift with quiet grace, understanding that the hearth was the centre of all things, that home was the foundation upon which all other things were built. And then Zeus turned his attention to the other beings who had fought alongside him, to the cyclopes and the hecatoncheires. He gave the cyclopes a place of honour, and he assigned them the task of forging the weapons and tools of the gods, of creating the objects of power that would be needed in the ages to come. The hecatoncheires he appointed as the guardians of Tartarus, ensuring that the imprisoned titans could never escape, that their chains would never be broken, that their imprisonment would endure for all eternity. And high above the world, in a place beyond the reach of mortals, Zeus commanded that a great mountain be raised. This would be Mount Olympus, the seat of divine power, the home of the gods, the place where the new order would be established and maintained. Palaces of white marble were built, with columns of gold and roofs of bronze. Gardens were planted where immortal flowers bloomed eternally. And the gods took their places there, each in their own palace, each in their own domain, each ready to begin the work of ruling the cosmos according to the new laws that Zeus had established. Thus Zeus sat upon his throne, and the cosmos found a new order, and the age of the Olympians began, and all things settled into their proper places, and the universe held its breath and waited to see what would come next. But the work of establishing the new order was far from complete. Zeus understood that the 12 Olympians alone could not govern the entire cosmos, that there were domains and forces that required their own divine overseers, that the cosmos was vast enough and complex enough to require many gods, each with their own purpose and their own power. And so he called forth other beings, other deities who had emerged from the primordial forces, or who had been born in the ages since creation began, and he distributed among them the various domains that required divine governance. To Athena, born from Zeus's own head in a moment of divine transformation, he gave dominion over wisdom and strategic warfare, over the crafts and the arts, over the cities and the civilization that mortals would one day build. Athena would be the goddess of wisdom, the protector of heroes, the one who guided mortals toward justice and right action. She would carry the aegis, the divine breastplate, and would be honoured by all who valued knowledge and skill. To Apollo, son of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, he gave dominion over the sun and the light, over music and poetry, over prophecy and healing. Apollo would drive the chariot of the sun across the sky each day, bringing light to the world, warming the earth, enabling all things to grow and flourish. He would be the god of the arts, inspiring mortals to create beauty and meaning, and he would be the keeper of prophecy, speaking the will of fate to those who came to his oracle. To Artemis, sister of Apollo, he gave dominion over the moon and the hunt, over the wilderness and the wild places, over the protection of young women and the cycles of nature. Artemis would be the huntress, the virgin goddess, the one who roamed the forests and the mountains, who protected the innocent and punished those who violated sacred laws. She would be independent and fierce, answering to no one but herself and her father Zeus. To Ares, son of Zeus and Hera, he gave dominion over warfare and violence, over the brutal aspects of conflict, over the bloodlust and the rage that seized warriors in battle. Ares was not the god of strategy like Athena, but the god of the raw, primal force of combat itself. He was feared and despised by many, but necessary, for warfare was part of the cosmos, and someone had to embody its terrible aspects. To Aphrodite, born from the foam of Uranus's blood, he gave dominion over love and desire, over beauty and attraction, over the forces that drew beings together in passion and connection. Aphrodite would be the most beautiful of all the goddesses, and her power would be such that even the greatest gods and mortals would fall under her spell. She would be both blessing and curse, for love could elevate or destroy, could create or devastate. To Hephaestus, son of Hera, he gave dominion over fire and the forge, over craftsmanship and creation, over the transformation of raw materials into objects of power and beauty. Hephaestus would work in his underground forge, creating the weapons and tools and treasures that the gods would use, shaping the very substance of creation itself through the power of fire and skill. To Hermes, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, he gave dominion over messages and commerce, over boundaries and transitions, over thieves and travellers. Hermes would be the messenger of the gods, carrying words between the divine realm and the mortal world, guiding souls to the underworld, overseeing the exchange of goods and the movement of beings from one place to another. To Demeter, sister of Zeus, he gave dominion over the harvest and the earth's fertility, over grain and agriculture, over the cycles of planting and reaping that sustained all life. Demeter would ensure that the earth brought forth abundance, that mortals would have food to eat, that the cycles of nature would continue their eternal turning. And each god took their place in the cosmos, and each was given their domain, and the universe found its rhythm, and all things knew their purpose. The night deepened, the stars turned. And the new order began to crystallize into permanence, into law, into the structure that would govern the cosmos for ages uncounted. High above the world, beyond the reach of mortal eyes, beyond the boundaries of the ordinary cosmos, Mount Olympus rose from the void like a dream made solid, like a thought of the gods given form and substance. It was not a mountain in the way that mortals understood mountains, not merely a pile of rock and earth, however vast. Rather, it was a place that existed partially in the physical world and partially in the realm of the divine, a threshold between the mortal and the immortal, a space where the laws of the cosmos were different, where time flowed differently, where the very substance of reality was more malleable and more responsive to divine will. The slopes of Olympus were clothed in eternal forests, where trees grew to heights that seemed to touch the sky itself. where flowers bloomed in colours that had no names in the mortal world, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with divine power. Crystal-clear streams flowed down the mountainside, their waters pure and cold, and filled with the essence of immortality. Any being who drank from these waters would feel renewed, revitalized, restored to perfect health and vigour. At the summit of Olympus stood the great palaces of the gods. These were not structures built by mortal hands, not constructed according to the principles of mortal architecture. Rather, they seemed to have grown from the mountain itself, as if the divine will of the gods had shaped the very stone and marble into the forms they desired. The palaces were vast and magnificent, with columns of white marble that gleamed like starlight, with roofs of bronze that caught the light and reflected it in patterns of extraordinary beauty, with walls inlaid with precious stones and metals that seemed to glow with an inner radiance. The palace of Zeus stood at the very centre of Olympus, a structure of such grandeur and majesty that even the other gods felt a sense of awe when they beheld it. Its throne room was vast beyond measure, with a ceiling so high that it seemed to touch infinity itself. The throne of Zeus was carved from a single piece of ivory and adorned with gold, and when Zeus sat upon it, his presence seemed to fill the entire cosmos, his authority extending to every corner of creation. Around the central palace stood the palaces of the other gods, each one reflecting the nature and the power of its inhabitant. The palace of Poseidon was built of coral and pearl, with chambers that seemed to flow like water, with walls that shifted and changed like the surface of the sea. The palace of Hades was built of obsidian and dark stone, with chambers that descended deep into the earth, with a throne room lit by the pale light of ghostly flames. The palace of Hera was a structure of breathtaking beauty, with gardens of impossible flowers and fountains that flowed with nectar and ambrosia. Each palace had its own character, its own beauty, its own reflection of the divine power that dwelt within it. Athena's palace was a place of wisdom and strategy, with libraries containing the knowledge of all ages. Apollo's palace was filled with music and light, with instruments that played themselves and walls that seemed to sing. Artemis's palace was wild and untamed, with forests and mountains contained within its walls, with the sounds of the hunt echoing through its chambers. And high above all the palaces, at the very peak of Olympus, stood the great hall where the gods gathered to hold council, where they made decisions that would affect the fate of the entire cosmos, where they feasted on ambrosia and nectar and discussed the great matters of creation and destiny. This hall was open to the sky, and from it one could see the entire cosmos spread out below, the earth with its mountains and valleys, the seas with their endless waves, the underworld with its hidden depths, and the vast expanse of space with its wheeling stars. And high above the world Olympus rose, gleaming with divine light, and the gods took their places there, and the cosmos knew that it had found its form, and would endure in this configuration for ages uncounted. The night deepened, the stars turned in their invisible courses, and the age of the Olympians had truly begun, not as a moment of victory, but as the establishment of a new order that would govern all things for the ages to come. And so the cosmos settled into its new form. The great work of creation and transformation was complete, at least for this age, at least for this cycle of the eternal pattern. The three realms were established, each with its own ruler, each with its own laws and principles, each with its own character and purpose. Above was the sky, the domain of Zeus, where the thunderbolts flashed and the clouds gathered and dispersed according to divine will. Below the earth was the sea, the domain of Poseidon, where the waters flowed and the creatures of the deep dwelt in their mysterious cities. And beneath even that was the underworld, the domain of Hades, where the dead journeyed and where the secrets of the earth were kept. The cosmos was no longer a place of pure potential, no longer a realm of infinite possibility without form or structure. It had taken on definition, it had acquired laws, it had developed a hierarchy, a system of governance, a way of organizing the infinite complexity of existence into patterns that could be understood and maintained. And yet, for all this order, for all this structure, the cosmos remained alive, remained dynamic, remained capable of change and transformation. The gods looked upon their creation, and they saw that it was good. They saw the mountains standing firm and eternal. They saw the waters flowing in their proper courses. They saw the light and darkness alternating in their prescribed rhythms. They saw the stars wheeling through their courses in the sky, each one following the path that had been laid out for it since the beginning of time. And they understood that they had done well, that the new order was just and wise, that the cosmos would endure in this form for ages uncounted. But the gods also understood that their work was not finished. The cosmos had been established, yes, but it still required constant attention, constant care, constant governance. The laws that had been established had to be maintained. The boundaries that had been set had to be guarded. The order that had been created had to be preserved against the forces of chaos that still lurked at the edges of creation, waiting for any opportunity to break through and transform the cosmos back into the formless void from which it had emerged. And so the gods settled into their roles. Zeus sat upon his throne and watched over all things, ensuring that justice was done, that the laws were obeyed, that the cosmic order was maintained. Poseidon rode across his seas in his chariot drawn by hippocampi, overseeing the waters, ensuring that they flowed in their proper courses, that the creatures of the deep remained in their proper places. Hades dwelt in his dark kingdom, receiving the souls of the dead, ensuring that they found their proper place in the underworld, that the cycle of life and death continued without interruption. And in the mortal world, which had not yet been fully populated, which was still waiting for the arrival of humanity and all the other creatures that would one day inhabit it, the gods began to prepare. They shaped the earth into mountains and valleys. They created forests and deserts, plains and marshes, all the infinite variety of landscapes that would one day support life. They established the cycles of seasons, the patterns of weather, the rhythms of nature that would govern all living things. And as the gods worked, as they shaped and moulded and created, something began to happen. The cosmos, which had been silent since the end of the Titanomachy, began to fill with sound. The wind began to blow through the forests, the waters began to flow and crash against the shores, the stars began to sing in their courses, and the cosmos, which had been empty except for the gods and the primordial forces, began to fill with life, with movement, with the endless activity of creation. And the cosmos settled into its new form, and the gods looked upon their creation, and they saw that it was good, and they knew that ages would pass and stories would unfold, and countless beings would be born and live and die. But the foundation had been laid, and the order would endure. The night deepened, the stars turned, and the tale continued, moving forward into the ages that were yet to come, into the stories that would be told and retold for all eternity, into the myths that would shape the understanding of mortals and gods alike. And so we have journeyed far, you and I, through the vast reaches of cosmic time, through the ages before ages, through the great transformations that shape the universe into the form it would hold for countless ages to come, we have witnessed the emergence of chaos from the void, the awakening of Gaia from the infinite potential, the descent of Tartarus into the deep places. We have seen Eros move through all things, awakening in them the desire to become. We have watched as the Titans were born and took their places in the cosmos, as Uranus ruled and fell, as Cronus took the throne and held it through paranoia and fear. We have followed Zeus from his hidden cave on Crete, watched as he grew in secret, nourished by the milk of Amalthea, taught by the wise metis. We have witnessed the Great War, the Titanomachy, that terrible conflict that shook the cosmos to its foundations. We have seen the hecatoncheires unleash their full power, seen the Titans fall and be imprisoned in Tartarus, seen the new order established and the gods take their places on Mount Olympus. And now, having reached this point in the great unfolding of creation, it is time to step back from the narrative itself and to contemplate what we have witnessed. For the story of creation is not merely a tale of events that happened long ago in a distant past. It is a story that speaks to the deepest truths about the nature of existence itself, about the eternal patterns that govern all things, about the cycles of transformation that continue even now, in this present moment, in the cosmos as it exists today. Consider what we have learned. We have learned that from chaos comes order, but that order is never permanent, never final. We have learned that every ruler, no matter how powerful, no matter how just, carries within them the seeds of their own overthrow. We have learned that justice and injustice are not abstract concepts, but forces that shape the cosmos itself, that determine the rise and fall of ages, that guide the destinies of gods and mortals alike. We have learned that transformation is the only constant in existence, that all things change, that nothing remains static for long. The void became chaos. Chaos gave birth to Gaia and Tartarus and Eros. From these primordial forces came the Titans. From the Titans came the Olympians. And from the Olympians would come countless other beings, countless other stories, countless other transformations that would reshape the cosmos again and again. We have learned that power without wisdom is tyranny, that knowledge without justice is cruelty, that strength without compassion is mere brutality. Uranus possessed power, but he lacked wisdom, and so he fell. Cronus possessed knowledge, but he lacked justice, and so he too was overthrown. Zeus, in contrast, possessed not only power and knowledge, but also the wisdom to use them justly, and so his rule would endure, at least for a time, at least for an age. We've learned that the universe is not a static thing, not a finished creation that emerged complete and perfect from the hands of some divine craftsman. Rather, it is a living, breathing, constantly evolving cosmos, shaped by the will of many beings, governed by laws that are themselves subject to transformation and change. We are not merely observers of this cosmos, not merely passive recipients of its gifts. We are participants in it, part of it, shaped by it, even as we shape it through our own actions and choices. And we have learned that we ourselves are part of this great story, that the myths of creation are not merely ancient tales, but truths that speak to the deepest nature of our own existence. Just as the cosmos emerged from chaos into order, so too do we emerge from the formlessness of sleep into the order of waking consciousness. Just as the gods struggled against tyranny and injustice, so too do we struggle against the forces within ourselves and within society that would oppress and diminish us. Just as the cosmos continues to transform and evolve, so too do we continue to grow and change throughout our lives, And so we return from the vast reaches of cosmic time, carrying with us the memory of how all things came to be, how from nothing came something, how from chaos came order, how from the old came the new. We return to ourselves, to this present moment, to this night in which we rest and dream and allow our minds to wander through the infinite possibilities of existence. We return carrying with us the knowledge that we are part of something vast and beautiful and eternal, something that extends far beyond our individual lives, something that connects us to all beings, past and present and yet to come. And now, as we reach the end of our journey, as the tale draws to its close, it is time to let go. It is time to release the great narrative that we have been holding in our minds, to set down the weight of cosmic history, to allow ourselves to drift away from the realm of gods and titans and primordial forces, and to return to the simple peace of rest and sleep. The myths may have left Olympus, but they never truly left us. They walk quietly now in books and songs, in dreams and memories, in every tale that dares to reach beyond the mortal veil and touch something eternal. They are not dead. They have simply moved. They exist now in a different form, in a different realm, in the space between waking and sleeping where all great truths reside. Think of what endures from this tale. Think of the knowledge that from chaos, order emerges. Think of the understanding that transformation is the nature of all things. Think of the wisdom that justice, though it may be delayed, though it may be obscured by tyranny and fear, ultimately prevails. Think of the comfort that comes from knowing that we are part of something vast and beautiful, something that has existed since before time itself began, something that will continue long after we have passed away. And as you think these thoughts, as you hold these truths gently in your mind, allow your body to relax. Feel the weight of your limbs growing heavier, sinking deeper into the bed that supports you. Feel the tension in your shoulders and your neck beginning to ease, beginning to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Feel your breath becoming slower, deeper, more rhythmic, more natural, as if your body is learning the rhythm of the cosmos itself, the great pulse that beats at the heart of all existence. The night deepens around you. The stars turn in their invisible courses, following the paths that were laid out for them at the beginning of time. The wind moves gently through the world, carrying with it the whispers of ancient stories, the echoes of gods and titans and primordial forces. And you drift, carried on the currents of time, safe in the knowledge that the cosmos holds you, as it has held all things since the beginning. Your eyelids grow heavy. The world around you begins to fade, to become less distinct, less real, less important. The concerns of the day, the worries and the anxieties that occupied your mind, begin to dissolve like dreams upon waking. They are still there, perhaps, in some distant part of your consciousness, but they are far away now, separated from you by the vast distance that opens up between waking and sleeping. And as you drift deeper, as you move further away from the world of waking consciousness and closer to the realm of sleep and dreams, you carry with you the memory of this journey, this voyage through cosmic time, this exploration of how all things came to be. You carry with you the knowledge that you are part of the cosmos, that the same forces that shape the universe shape you, that the same eternal patterns that govern the stars govern your own life and destiny. Sleep now. Sleep and dream of the void before all creation and the beauty that emerged from it. Dream of chaos and Gaia and Tartarus and Eros dancing together in the darkness. Dream of the titans rising up, of the great war, of the new order being established. Dream of Mount Olympus rising high above the world, gleaming with divine light. Dream of the cosmos settling into its new form, eternal and beautiful and ever-changing. Good night.